The Visigothic kingdom was unaware of the looming threat from the south, as the Muslims were poised to invade and destroy their civilization. The last battle for their survival would be fought by the Guadalete. In the year 680 after Christ, Rodrigo had just taken the Visigothic throne, and to legitimize himself on it, he convened the 12th Council of Toledo, making clear his good relations with the Catholic Church, which would be his support throughout his reign. We are already in a proto-feudal state, which means that the nobles have more and more power, and their private armies are essential for the king to be able to wage battles. A key point was that he ended torture for both secular and religious aristocrats, so confessions had to be obtained through a court made up mainly of nobles and bishops. In the year 687, Rodrigo died and was succeeded by Egica, his nephew. He was radically anti-Jewish and ordered their dispersal throughout the kingdom to prevent them from accumulating power in one place and conspiring against him. And it seems that there was a wave of Jewish rebellions throughout the Mediterranean basin. He also had to face 2 internal rebellions which he defeated without much trouble. And in the year 700, he decided to share the throne with Vitiza, his son. They ruled together until the year 702, when Egica died of natural causes, leaving Vitiza as the sole monarch. He attempted to reconcile the Visigoths by lifting the exile penalties for the nobility, who had been banished by his father. He also returned the property that had been expropriated. The idea was once again to govern with benevolence, mercy, and respect rather than with terror. Unfortunately, not much is known about his reign. In 705, the region of present-day Tangier and the imperial city of Ceuta fell into the hands of Umayyads. Now, the Muslims were just a handful of kilometers from the peninsula and began to launch raids or plundering attacks along the southern coast, even attacking coastal towns and cities. Maritime trade and navigation in the strait were also affected. In the year 710, Vitiza died of natural causes. Quite a milestone, since we've already had several kings who died of natural causes. His family tried to keep the throne, but the Visigothic nobility did not want one of his descendants to rule. They wanted to be the ones to choose the monarch. The nobility chose Rodrigo as king, but Vitiza's family would not accept this. Rodrigo was well liked by much of the aristocracy and had strong ties to the city of Córdoba. In the spring of the year 711, he set out with his men to carry out a punitive campaign against the Vascones. Although it's also possible that he was suppressing a rebellion in the northeast, which will be key later on. He was likely fighting against the Vascones. The Visigothic army was in the north. A part of the kingdom didn't want King Rodrigo, and Muhammad's forces had expansionist ambitions, a dangerous breeding ground for the Catholics of Hispania. It's possible that Vitiza's family asked the Muslims for help to rebel and get rid of Rodrigo, and that's not something they should be condemned for. Many before them had already asked for outside help, whether it was the Suebi, the Franks, or the Byzantines, who took advantage and stayed on the peninsula. You can learn about this by clicking the link shown on the screen. The fact is that Musa, the Umayyad governor of North Africa, sent Tari in command of a Berber army to the peninsula. The invading force of about 7,000 men arrived at what is now Gibraltar, and from there, while waiting for the rest of the army to arrive, launched attacks on the surrounding lands. Why was it so easy to take these lands? Because the Count of Egica himself was fighting in the north alongside Rodrigo, and had taken his troops with him. So in the south, there were barely a handful of warriors defending. Tariq, seeing the minimal opposition, he took more risks and managed to take control of the Algeciras region. Seeing that weeks were passing and the invaders were not leaving, Rodrigo abruptly halted the northern campaign and ordered his troops to march south. He was beginning to realize that the Muslim threat was much greater than he had expected. He called for arms throughout the Visigothic kingdom, raised levies, armed peasants, and managed to swell his ranks. Although he had the rebel in the northeast, there was no time to deal with him. The main priority was to expel the invading Moors. Rodrigo finally reached the south and met the Umayyad army in open battle. There were no elaborate tactics or formations. Both armies placed their infantry in the center and their cavalry on the wings. The Berber cavalry was responsible for starting the battle. Since it was much lighter than the Muslim cavalry, their strategy was to harass the Visigothic flank to throw them off balance. Very similar to what happened in the Battle of Bouillé, which, by the way, you can learn about in the link shown at the top of the screen. The Muslims would approach, throw their projectiles, and then gallop away again and again. But this was only occurring on one side. What was taking place on the other? Nothing. Rodrigo feared the worst. Suddenly, the left flank turned around and trotted off the battlefield. They were loyal to the clan of Vitiza and didn't want Rodrigo as their king. The Visigothic army had suddenly lost its left wing, which left its flank exposed to an enemy attack. Rodrigo realized that he had to end the battle as soon as possible to avoid being surrounded. He galloped to the right and from there rallied his horsemen. They would fight for the Visigothic kingdom, for the legacy of Olivigildo and Recaredo, for the ancestors who crossed the lines of the Roman Empire and migrated to Hispania, for Alarico's dream. And of course, they would fight for God. He ordered a general attack and the whole army charged against the Muslims. The Visigothic cavalry tried to catch up with the Humela, but they kept throwing their javelins and galloping away again and again. Until finally, the Berbers who charged against the Gothic cavalry engaged in a fight to the death. The infantries clashed and a fierce battle broke out that seemed to be turning in favor of the Visigoths. However, Tariq ordered his reserve and his right wing to surround the Visigoth warriors at the point where the Gothic left wing should have been. These troops ran to position themselves on the Visigoth flank and rear, and then all at once they shouted their battle cry and charged. It was a massacre, a slaughter. The Visigoths fell in succession to the Berber swords. For their part, the Visigothic cavalry was doing well, until a detachment of enemy infantry ran up and attacked them. The cavalry, unable to charge or maneuver, was left exposed. The mounted Visigoths also began to fall. Rodrigo personally fought every rider who came near him. But then, a spear wielded by an infantryman pierced his horse and killed it, throwing the monarch to the ground. The final Visigothic king resolved to protect his kingdom and God with his life. He got up and kept fighting from the ground like a cornered lion. His energy was running out, but he had to keep fighting. He thrust and slashed at every Muslim he saw. His sword was nicked, his shield dented. Sweat soaked his clothes and his mouth tasted like iron because of the Muslim blood that had splattered on him. His armor weighed him down, the sun was draining him, and the enemies kept coming. He killed one and another appeared in an endless Maria. He had already lost count of how many slashes and thrusts he had delivered, of how many infidels had died by his hand. A rider, a Berber, seeing that he was facing the very Visigoth king, spurred his mount and charged with his lance at the ready. At the same time, he let out his feared battle cry, a cry that had conquered almost half of the Mediterranean basin. Rodrigo managed to turn around and only had time to see how a spear pierced his chest and broke his spine. He fell to the ground, his gaze lost. In the firmament, it was beautiful. God's creation never failed to astound him. The white clouds drifted across the blue sky, oblivious to what was happening in that battle, to what was at stake. At that moment, a flock of crows started gathering before him. He heard the roar of battle, the clash of weapons, the screams of pain, everything. Until suddenly the noise disappeared. He no longer felt pain. He touched his chest and there was no spear stuck in it. He sat up and stood up. He was surrounded by calm men with a noble bearing and wearing Visigothic clothing. They were kings. In front of him were Naudarico, Ataulfo, Valia, Chedorico, Turismundo, Eurico, Teodis, Leovigildo, Recaredo, Sisebuto, and Swintila. The greatest monarchs of his people approached him. He expected to be reproached for messing up. Everything they had fought for, everything those men had achieved, but nothing could be further from the truth. They exonerated him. He had done what he could for his kingdom, even giving his own life. The Visigothic kingdom was a stain, merely a stepping stone for the Muslims. Rodrigo would finally be reunited with his creator. I think he deserved a bit of epicness. I'm going to go back to the regular story. The Visigothic army was destroyed, and the troops loyal to the family of Vitiza, who thought they were safe, were attacked by the Berber cavalry and crushed. The loyalists to the king and the traitors were executed by the invaders. After the battle, Cadiz fell, and Musa, governor of North Africa, landed
with 18,000
men on the peninsula, and, merging with Tarek's army, they took the city of Medina Sidonia almost without resistance. The next target was Seville, which suffered a harsh siege. It lasted more than 30 days and had to surrender because of hunger and disease. After this, he sent an army to take Merida and another to Cordoba. The goal was to destroy the Visigoths' administrative and military power centers. Tariq led the attack on Cordoba, which fell because the city's leader surrendered. Despite that, the Muslims slaughtered the defenders of the citadel, fearing they might be attacked from behind. Musa personally led the siege of Merida. The city put up strong resistance, refused to fall, and all Umayyad attacks were repelled by the defenders. To avoid wasting time, Musa left an army at the siege and marched with the rest to the capital. With the south almost taken, Musa advanced toward Toledo with his troops, but he encountered one last resistance. The remaining Visigoths in the south had gathered to face the invading forces one last time. A last attempt? But Musa crushed them without difficulty and continued toward Toledo, taking Cáceres along the way. When he arrived at the capital, Tariq joined him. Toledo, the capital of the kingdom, fell due to a Jewish betrayal. This reinforces the fear that the Visigoths had of a possible Jewish conspiracy in their kingdom, which ultimately ended up happening. The Visigothic kingdom was doomed, but there were still nobles willing to continue the fight. A Gothic nobleman named Pelayo would gather his loyal followers to fight one last battle against the Muslims, planting the seed of the Reconquista. With this video, I finished the series on the Visigothic kingdom, so it's time to begin the Reconquista. I hope you've enjoyed the series, that you show it some love, and as always, strength and honor.